your team, the Dallas Cowboys, or technically Jerry's team. Gonna go over this real quick, and then I'll throw it to you and let you go. But anyway, Dallas, they went 2-5 last year, lost in the divisional round to San Francisco. Their departures: offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, he is gone. Running back Ezekiel Elliott. Offensive lineman Jason Peters, who filled in admirably for them. Guard Connor McGovern. Also tight end Dalton Schultz left as well. And then on defense, Anthony Brown and Anthony Barr also departed. And they also let go of kicker Brett Maher, but that may not be such a bad thing, as you may allude to. And then in terms of additions, offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer, and then running back Ronald Jones. And they also made the trade for wide receiver Brandon Cooks. And if I remember correctly, y'all did technically trade for Stephon Gilmore as well, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll make so those two, and then I'm sure if there's anyone else I missed, you can add. And then draft-wise, first round went defensive tackle Mozzie Smith out of Michigan at pick 26. And then went right back to Michigan in the second round with tight end Luke Schoonmaker, excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, at pick 58. Nonetheless, John, the floor is yours. What are your thoughts on your Cowboys?
I think the offseason was a decent one. I don't think it was anything flashy. I mean, you read off the additions, the draftees. Really, the only two moves that I feel are incredibly notable were obviously Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore. I really like the Gilmore one because the defensive unit in general really excites me. This feels like Dan Quinn's vision is really coming to pass. I mean, I think about the linebacking core. We're going to finally see a year where Jabril Cox and Damone Clark are both going to be the starting linebackers. And, the Cowboys drafted them within the last 2 years, both really solid, big athletes who can cover a lot of space, which feels very much like what Dan Quinn is going to want. Also, we drafted Demarion Overshone. We added Devin Harper a couple of years ago too. Malik Jefferson got added, and now Leighton Vander Esch stayed on. So I don't know. I'm excited to see what the linebacker core could do. I do think it's the weakest of the units, just because Cox has dealt with injuries. Clark is relatively unproven, although he did play a little bit at the end of last year. It's really just Vander Esch, so I am interested to see how they use him. But the reason I'm excited about it is just because they are all big, long athletes who, it fits the Dan Quinn mold, and so I think it'll be fun. Also, at least as of right now, from everything I'm hearing, I think Micah Parsons is probably going to fully commit to being a defensive end. Obviously, they're still going to use him plenty in the ways that are the most effective, so he probably will slot in at linebacker throughout the season. But I think this will probably be the year that he plays the most pass rush snaps than he has previously. So I think that'll be pretty fun, just to see what he can do. They add Mozzie Smith, obviously, just to get some size. I really liked that pick just purely from the fact that you have him and Jonathan Hankins now, who are both just very large men, because if anybody goes back and watches the last 2 times the Cowboys lost a playoff game, it was to the Kyle Shanahan 49ers. And although the Niners, specifically last year's game, they weren't really able to move the ball effectively and score. They only put up, I think, 16 points. They had maybe one solid drive that I believe was capped off by a McCaffrey touchdown. Other than that, it was a pretty defensive battle. And the one thing that, the Niners, even though it was, once again, still somewhat limited, did have success with was running the ball. And that's been 2 years in a row now that the Niners have controlled the trenches. And this is now 2 years in a row that the Cowboys have tried to go get reinforcements to beat the Niners, because with the NFC, with Aaron Rodgers leaving, Tom Brady retiring, you look at the landscape of the NFC, and it really feels like the two dominant teams are going to be the Niners and the Eagles, and both teams are really good at controlling the trenches. So it seems like the Cowboys are very aware of trying to build up to counter what the opposing teams they are gunning against are good at. I'm very excited to see what the secondary can do. You have Diggs, you add in Gilmore. I'm really excited to see Deron Bland in the nickel once again in his second year now. He had a really solid season last year, I think, with 3 interceptions. So that's going to be fun. Also, you still bring back Jordan Lewis, who has plenty of experience, and so I think they have good depth there. And then at safety, they still got the three-headed monster of Curse, Donovan Wilson, and Malik Hooker, who have just been running rampant for the Cowboys in the Dan Quinn scheme. So overall, I don't know, just based on what I'm saying, I really think this could be a very strong defensive unit. And we said this last year, but this could even be like the focal point of this Cowboys team is defense first. And then on offense, they try to play a lot of complementary football, despite the fact that they got a lot of talent over there. On offense, the one thing that really does worry me for the offense is the depth on the offensive line. Tyron Smith has obviously been not the greatest picture of health. I do think that if he does get hurt, they will bump Tyler Smith back to left tackle. As of right now, at the end of last year, Tyler Smith was playing, not the end, the whole year, Tyler Smith played left tackle. And then when Tyron came back, Terrence Steele was hurt, so Tyron played right tackle. But then when Terrence Steele came back, Tyron ended up moving to left guard. They're going back to what was the original plan, which is Tyron Smith at left tackle, Tyler Smith at left guard, and then obviously the rest of the line, Biotish, Martin, Steele. So I don't know. I think it's a really strong starting unit. It's just the backup tackles we have are Matt Lewetzko, I think is how you pronounce it, and he was like a 5th or 6th round pick, I think, like 2 years ago. So I don't know. He's got a lot of size. It's just very unproven. Then on the opposite side, they have Alex Taylor, who, once again, second-year guy, a lot of size, unproven. Then they have Josh Ball, who's like a backup guard, once again, unproven. So I don't know. I'm a bit worried about the depth of the offensive line, assuming, once again, Terrence Steele got hurt last year. Tyron Smith got hurt last year. If there's any injuries, once again, knock on wood, I just don't know who would slot in. It doesn't feel like they really have like that one veteran swing tackle that they've kind of relied on throughout the last couple of years, like you said, with Jason Peters, who they added last year. So maybe they go that route again, assuming something happens. I don't know who would be available, but I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, for the tight ends, I'm interested just to see who wins that job. They drafted Ferguson last year. They drafted Schoonmaker this year. They had Peyton Hendershot, who was undrafted last year. All three are very young. I was surprised they took Schoonmaker because I thought that Ferguson and Hendershot showed enough last year that I felt pretty confident that they could be the two options. And then you use a second-round pick on Schoonmaker. I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of it, but we'll see. We'll see what happens coming from there. Pollard finally getting the shot to be the starting running back. That's going to be fun. You got the three-headed monster of Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Michael Gallup. I'm really excited for that trio because Lamb, another year as the true number one, hopefully with Dak healthy the whole year. Then Brandon Cooks, I think, just adds like sort of a really good dynamic of being both a deep threat and he can kind of do some other stuff as well. That he feels like a very intermediate between both Gallup and Lamb, so he kind of fits perfectly between the two. And then Gallup, I'm hoping, like last year, he didn't look that good, just to be perfectly honest. Like he wasn't creating a lot of separation. I'm hoping that being a full year removed from his ACL, because sometimes just like mentally it takes a little while to get over that, that he can be back to his usual playmaking self where he's making crazy catches on the sideline, being a big play, deep threat. Because if he can be that, then I think this offense could be pretty deadly just because of the weapons they have. And then for Dak, didn't have the greatest of seasons last year. He was still relatively solid. It was just the interceptions became a bit of a question. When he wasn't throwing interceptions, he was looking really strong. It just felt like every game he would have like one or two really kind of boneheaded throws. You're like, man, Dak, like, what are we doing? So yeah, anyway, they're an interesting team. I fully expect this team to be a playoff team. There's just a lot of talent across the board. And with Dan Quinn, Micah Parsons, some of the guys they got over on that defensive unit, still DeMarcus Lawrence and Trayvon Diggs and the safeties, and you add Gilmore. I just think that defense is going to be too good for this team not to be a playoff team. The question for them is, can they beat the Eagles? Both teams last year, unfortunately, when they played each other, the first time Dak was out, the second time Hurts was out. So let's hope we can see both healthy this year, a full Cowboys versus Eagles matchup, and see who comes out on top, and then who comes out on top in the division. And then, as the story has been my entire life, can the Cowboys win a divisional round game? I don't know. We'll see.
We will have to.
Oh, and sorry, real quick before I throw it to you, I like getting rid of Kellen Moore. Once again, I think a lot of people, in my opinion, overrate him just based off of stats. Like, of course, everybody wants to say the Cowboys are the number one offense to benefit Kellen Moore, but nobody wants to say that to benefit like any of the players, like Zeke or Dak or anybody who I like to trash. But I did think that Kellen Moore was a little bit overrated, so I wasn't mad about getting rid of him. That said, I personally, I'd been very vocal that I wanted Sean Payton. They didn't get Sean Payton. They end up getting, they keep, what's-his-face, McCarthy, and then they just bring in Schottenheimer. Not a big fan of Schottenheimer, which I'm sure you were probably going to talk about because we have both talked about him in the past during, the Let Russ Cook era. And then also he had his time with Jacksonville, which I think he wasn't very good in. So I don't know. I mean, like, when you just kind of go through the list of, like, his coordinator jobs, like, it's not pretty. He was the Jets coordinator back when they were really good, but that was because of their defense back under, like, the Mark Sanchez era. Their offense was kind of a little bit of a mess at times. He was the Rams coordinator from 2012, 2014 with Jeff Fisher. That was a mess. Then he was the Seahawks coordinator from 2018 to 2020. Jacksonville passing game coordinator in 2021, which was So I don't know how to feel about the Schottenheimer hiring. That said, I'm hoping that for Jerry Jones, like, you got to view this year for McCarthy and the whole offensive staff. Like, at this point, Dan Quinn has proven himself that if anything happens to the head coaching job, like, Dan Quinn might be the guy who ends up taking it. But for McCarthy and that whole staff, like, this has got to be a make or break year. There's just no way that, like, when we brought him in, I was saying it. The expectations were we got rid of Jason Garrett because this roster was too talented and couldn't win a playoff game. So, or if they did win a playoff game, it was the wild card game, then they couldn't advance past that when they had higher expectations than that. So, I don't know. It just, if McCarthy goes another year without getting past the divisional round, like, to me, the Cowboys, they have to go to the conference championship. They have to. Otherwise, I think McCarthy has to get fired, personally.
Yeah, so I just want to add on the Schottenheimer. That's really was the only thing I was going to add. You obviously went over everything to great detail, as you should know. You're a Cowboys fan. But yeah, Schottenheimer has not had a great track record. I'll have to see where the original poster of this, but I remember there's this graphic on Twitter that I had, and I looked like I saved the picture. So yes, you mentioned the Rams, 2012, 2014. Just to bring up a little more numbers to that, 25th, 21st, and 21st in offense, so never better than a pretty mid offense, to say the least. Went to Georgia, and then that's apparently your Mark Richt was there, and then only went there for a year, and everyone got fired, including Brian. And then Brian Schottenheimer went to the Colts for 1 year for 2016, 2017. They were the 30th offense. Not a great look. Then you mentioned he goes to Seattle, which he did. Their run numbers did improve, but granted, that was Seattle and Russell Wilson at the height of his power. So one could say there's a bit of a caveat there. Nonetheless, obviously, you got let go the year that they tried to let Russ cook. He cooked for a bit, and then they just never had any adjustments or further developments in their offense. They got figured out. He got let go from Seattle, and then the 1 year in Jacksonville was the Urban Meyer year, and we all know how that went. Very poorly, in case some were wondering. But
and I will say, in his defense, Urban Meyer was a mess. The Jeff Fisher era, the talent was kind of ass. Like, there's some excuses out there, I guess, but I'm still not enthusiastic about it.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm just speculating. Like, is Mike gonna be calling more, like calling the plays again, or was he calling?
Okay. Apparently McCarthy he's taken over the play calling.
So, yeah, maybe Schottenheimer appointing him is to improve the run game, because I think that was a point of criticism that McCarthy kind of had, if I remember correctly, of Kellen Moore. Was like, hey, we got to run the ball more.
Yes.
So maybe it's just to help kind of imprint that ideology. Although I will say, as a Packer fan, I heard that a lot from Mike in Green Bay. Now, granted, we also did not have, especially towards the end, the offensive line and I would say the running back group that, Pollard that you have there. I think those were like the Eddie Lacy years and James Starks. So important caveat. But other than that, I don't have really much else to add. I think you really obviously hit most of it there. So we'll see if your Cowboys can take the next step. And if not, it seems pretty clear the direction that they will have to go in terms of letting Mike McCarthy go. But who knows in this league? Who knows with Jerry what will occur?
If I don't mean to go on a rant, but if they disappoint again this year, and by disappoint, once again, I mean anything less than the conference championship, like to some people on the outside looking in, that might be a crazy goal because, and I will admit, like the Niners and Eagles, if I had to predict right now, they're the two better teams, assuming once again, health for everybody involved. They are the more talented, deeper rosters, better coaches. Like they're the better teams, right? And yet, with the Cowboys, this is just, it's kind of been an expectations for such a long time. And they've shown the ability to like do it. Like last year, they beat the Eagles. They were able to outscore them. In that Niners game, if Brett Maher doesn't miss 4 field goals, mathematically, they win that game. And that's obviously an assumption because who knows how Shanahan calls the game if the Cowboys ever take the lead at any point. So I take that with all a grain of salt. The point being, like, they were close to winning these games and they just can't get it done. And so just the fact that the Cowboys for like the last 8 years have been close, it's like, no, close isn't good enough anymore. I don't care if these teams are considered better. You have the talent. It's time to get it done. If you don't get it done and Jerry Jones gives me another full offseason of BS where it's like, well, we're going to make the moves that we need to. We got urgency, blah, blah, blah. And his big splash is like a couple trades and I like the trades of Brandon Cooks and Gilmore. I will add that, like, ever since I've been a Cowboys fan, I can't remember the last time that Jerry Jones ever did 2 trades like that in the same season. Like I do think that he's feeling the urgency, but if we're going to keep McCarthy again, and this year with him calling plays, like you said, if they disappoint again with this receiver core, with Dak, who's a veteran quarterback, like he's at this point, he should be entering into his prime. Pollard has proven to be a really solid guy. Like, I don't know, there's just too much talent on this team for them not to have a really successful season. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it'll take maybe Dak. And I don't mean to speculate, but if it goes bad, Dak maybe's got to pull the Aaron Rodgers card because I don't know if you remember towards the end there, especially Aaron would always be like, people could read Aaron's lips like this bad, like talking to Mike about some of the play calls, like right after like we run the ball on like a 3rd down or something. And
the hard part is that like Dak is like a lightning rod for being blamed for everything.
Yes,
like
so he may not get away with that.
Yeah, and Aaron had the Super Bowl ring, right? So it's like once you got the ring, the quarterback becomes a little more ingrained in like, this is the guy. Like, obviously McCarthy had the ring too, but like Aaron Rodgers had elevated to that point where it's like, this guy's the best quarterback in the league. Like, he was winning MVPs and like Dak doesn't have that prestige to where like, I'm still here. I've heard this every year since maybe Dak's 3rd season that like Dak's got to go. And I think it's a very stupid opinion from a lot of very uneducated people because I've always been like, well, who are they going to get? Like all the idiots who were like, oh, they should trade him for Trevor Lawrence. Like the Jaguars weren't going to trade the number 1 pick when they had Trevor Lawrence on the table. Like, what are people talking about? So I don't know. And Jerry Jones totally seems like the type of guy to like buy into some of that BS. And so if he would, I don't know. I could see a crazy world where he would get rid of Dak. We keep McCarthy and then like we got freaking, I don't know, Baker Mayfield coming in and being like some, I don't know. That seems, it seems crazy to say all that, but with Jerry Jones, you never know. You never know.
Hey, there's a universe out there where that has occurred, and I'm assuming the John Harris of that universe has probably pulled his hair out. So.
I don't think it will, just because Romo lasted forever, and he had a very similar career arc that Dak has. Like, it's kind of crazy to look back on Romo's career because he was like a good quarterback. Like, obviously, he was never like a top 5 guy, but he was like above average to at his peak, probably like kind of where Dak is right now, of like in like at the bottom of the top 10, and maybe even, I don't know, I can't remember based on, how people viewed everybody back then, but maybe there was even a year where he was like borderline, like approaching like 6-7 kind of area. But I just remember being a Cowboys fan watching him and everybody blamed Tony Romo for like every problem. Even though the Cowboys had like no defense his entire career except for like 2 years. It was like everybody blamed Romo. And like people do that for Dak sometimes too. I don't know. It just gets annoying.
Sorry, just to add on that before we move on. I specifically remember the Lions game where like Calvin Johnson had like 300 yards and Dez had a good game too. Dez had like 150 and like 2 or 3 touchdowns. Didn't matter. The Lions won, and Calvin, like I said, Calvin Johnson had like he almost broke the receiving yards record that game. And that was the lines where they were just throwing to Calvin Johnson. Like, come on, guys.
There's literally a picture from that game of Calvin catching it over 3 defenders. It was like he was just simply better than us. And I guarantee there were some fans out there that was like, Romo just couldn't keep up. Like, what do you mean? Like,
I think even though Romo put up, like, I think 30 plus points and Romo in the offense put up 30 plus points, it's like, well, come on. What would you want him to do? He did his job. So,
and I'm not saying that Dak's like invincible from criticism. It's just, once again, like the quarterback market is not like what people think it is. Getting rid of Dak doesn't, like, I don't know who you would upgrade to. Like, Dak's a really good quarterback, and there's not a lot of options out there that would be available that are worthy to take a shot at. So, and once again, I think it's honestly a crime that both Dak and Romo have never had a good coach. It pains me. I'm not gonna lie.